He's our Organic Valley vet. He also has a sheep flock, and if there's anything else you want to tell him about yourself, go for it.
Yeah. Just real quickly, I've been doing the intensive grazing thing now just out of sheer luck since 1987. My first job out of college was working for a New Zealander in Pennsylvania. And so I just kind of got the bug, and we milk cows on the farm where we're at, and we have sheep now, so it's just been a passion for me, and I've been really fortunate to find a job at Organic Valley that lets me think and talk about grazing every day then, so that's been pretty nice. I wanted to talk about dairy nutrition and how it relates to the kind of milk we're being asked to produce now, and I will relate it to soil health because they do all come together then. I'm going to be, since we don't have PowerPoints, I'm just working off of the handout I gave you then. And I'd like to just start with this, this first graph, which kind of describes the problem of the whole dairy industry and grazing farms in particular then. So the little inset picture is average USDA percent butterfat, the dark black dots, and how that varies through the year. And the percent fat varies across the country by 0.2% in the summer. We get that milk fat depression then, probably mostly due to environmental factors, heat, most commonly then. And then we compare it to the bigger chart, which is Organic Valley's percent milk fat fluctuation throughout the year. And this follows, anybody that's producing milk on pasture. This is a problem that's being had in Australia and Ireland, and there's a lot of research being done on it. But we get a milk fat depression of 0.4 to 0.5% fat. And that used to not be a problem then across the entire world. If you are old enough to remember, everyone was complaining about mountains of butter building up in storage then. Well, it's the exact opposite. There are mountains of non-fat dry milk powder and not enough milk fat then. So what we're working on as a co-op is to help people minimize that milk fat depression that happens during the summertime. And we accept that we're going to get some milk fat depression, but a lot of that difference between the USDA average and the OV average milk fat depression is going to be related to pasture feeding then. So just a quick discussion of actually why that happens then. That next picture, it's a little bit hard to read. I've made a better graphic for it then. In the effort to understand what's happening in milk fat depression, they've discovered that there is a CLA molecule. Now when we talk about CLA in grass-fed milk and meat, it's generally considered to be a good thing, and usually people are thinking about one molecule. But it turns out that there's a number of variations on the CLA, and one of those minor variations actually inhibits milk fat synthesis in the mammary gland at the level of transcription of the DNA for the enzyme that makes fat then. So it acts almost like a hormone then in suppressing milk fat. And the reason this is important in dairy cows is if you look at the top of this picture here, we start with linoleic acid, and again, CLA stands for conjugated linoleic acid. Fresh green pasture plants are very high in linoleic acid. It's the second most common unsaturated fat in them. So we're bringing a lot of this raw material for CLA production, which is great if we're trying to make the good CLA, but if we end up making some of these fat-depressing CLAs, it's a bad thing then. So it turns out that there are different bacterial populations in the rumen that make the good CLA versus the bad CLA. And the kind of fermentation we get in the rumen is what influences the milk fat production and whether we get a lot of this bad CLA made. So in thinking about pasture quality, when I started out, it was the New Zealand mentality where we were just trying to grow the absolute best, highest quality, the highest number on the test value that we could get then. And now it's turning out that as with most things, there's an optimum that will give us the right kind of rumen fermentation that we need to produce milk fat then. So and the other thing about this picture is that these bacteria are turning this unsaturated fat coming from the pasture, and they both end up at stearic acid. So they're trying to saturate these fats then. So that's why the bacteria are doing this. They're trying to take these unsaturated fats that are toxic to the bacteria and convert them into saturated fats. And those are the final products that end up as being in the milk fat and the body fat of these cows then. The next pictures I have, so I'd like to talk about plant maturity and how it relates to the kind of fermentation we're going to get in the rumen, and that will relate to cow health and soil health then. And if we take our good old friend in this sigmoid curve here, we're all mostly used to looking at this picture then. We know that it starts off slowly, we've got a small leaf area, and then once we've got enough green area for solar collectors, it starts growing at an exponential fast rate then. It used to be, again, when I started grazing, we were trying to manage down at the lower end of this sigmoid curve, so we get the absolute best quality that we could get. The other end of this spectrum is where the growth starts to flatten out. The beef guys talking about mob grazing, ultra long rest periods. That's the other extreme. What I'm arguing for, and when we start looking at rations based on pastures, if we can harvest grass that's a little bit farther up that curve, a little bit taller, a little bit more maturity, we're going to get the right kind of feed that we need to get the fermentations we want. Now, evaluating what's going on fermentation-wise in the cow, you can't see what's going on in there, obviously, then, but we can monitor MUNs, and we can also start paying real attention to manure quality then. So we want to see a nice cow flock, even when they're grazing lush green pastures. Again, back when I started off, we just sort of accepted, in the springtime, that garden hose manure as being what happened when you grazed really high quality feed then. I wish I had known now that I was causing a lot of problems for those cows by doing that, and that aiming to get a little bit better manure quality would have meant that the cows were healthier as well then. So I have these next three charts are comparing crude protein, NDF, which is the total amount of fiber, nutrient fiber in those plants, and then the fiber digestibility of those pasture plants also then. And you can see that just by allowing a little bit extra growth period, for many farms it might be on the order of 7 to 10 days longer rest periods then, kind of like what we were seeing out there with a 30-day rest period, those kind of forages then. We get a fiber level that is conducive to getting that fermentation that we want, where the bacteria have time to work on it. We actually get a fiber mat, and we get the volatile fatty acids and the energy extracted from those pastures and take advantage of them. The fiber digestibility, you can see, even though we're giving it a little bit more time, we've got a little bit more maturity there, we really haven't affected digestibility at all, but we've lowered the protein as well. So the quality of that fermentation is going to be significantly better then. And what that means for the cow is, if we have a ration that's low in fiber, we get that abnormal fermentation, that abnormal manure. She's always having to fight an acidotic rumen, and that's hard on her health. Also, on pasture, that rumen will have a lot of ammonia because we're putting so much nitrogen, so much crude protein through it then. So affecting the kind of milk she produces, but her health is going to be much better as well then. So on these charts, I kind of relate the kind of forage we want to look to the height of the pasture then. And that's been a problem when I've been talking about it in the past then. It varies from species to species, farm to farm. And what it's turned out is happening is the really good grazers, they get into, arguments about whether 10 inches is better than 12 inches is better than 14 inches. And the people that really need to change their management style, they can't even picture what, grazing, a 12-inch pasture looks like, or how they would manage that then. So another way of looking at this, we could look at plant physiology and maybe use leaf count rather than absolute height for deciding whether the plant is ready to be grazed, and also it will affect the fiber levels in that plant too. And I've got a couple of really important graphs from Jeff Brink that I think are really excellent at bringing together, the plant physiology and the cow physiology. And if we, that top picture, if we look at neutral detergent fiber levels as a percent of the plant, and also just the digestibility of that fiber over the changes in grass maturity. So a 3-leaf, a 5-leaf, and then this is a reproductive stage of this plant, stem, root stage, and head stage. We really get a better idea. That 3-leaf grass, at 38% NDF, that's probably a little bit low if grass is the majority of that ration then. But if we can let it get up to a 4, 5-leaf maybe, 3-leaf is a minimum for the plant health. If we graze it before that, then we're going to not allow that plant to develop its full energy reserves. So it's waiting that extra time is a benefit to the plant, and it's also a benefit to the cow. Again, she gets a better fermentation then too. So I would really suggest we start, when walking around out in pastures, height is great, but really dig down, start pulling some tillers from the base and doing leaf counts and looking at the quality of the leaves on those tillers then too. And I think that may be more instructive. In the Midwest here, I travel out to the West Coast and they're all perennial ryegrass, and that doesn't matter as much to them, but we've got so many very different kinds of species in our pastures. I think it's really useful to do that. And then this bottom one that Jeff Brink has looks at the changes in plant quality at various times of the year. And basically what this is showing, it's sort of intuitive, we all sort of understand this, but in the springtime, when those plants are in their reproductive phase, plant quality changes really rapidly then. Whereas once we get past that reproductive phase, we've got longer periods of time to wait, and quality of those plants don't deteriorate. And I take this as a point of wanting to, early in the spring or as early as it will work, switching those grass plants over from being in the reproductive phase to a vegetative phase. The longer we leave those reproductive stem heads on there, they're going to inhibit the development of new vegetative tillers, and we're going to have lower quality and lower production throughout the rest of the year. So, Peter, what you were describing about getting those plants, getting the seed heads off of there harvested or grazed or just mown is exactly what we're talking about then, as far as trying to maintain that right level of quality then. So, any questions then? Well, I guess to bring it back around to soil health. On this curve again, if we allow those plants to grow a little bit more, we're going to develop a deeper root system. And there's been a couple of studies actually looking at what happens to soil carbon as far as sequestration, organic matter, and a number of other factors too then. And it turns out grazing in that region, you sequester the most carbon and you build up organic matter at the fastest level. Actually, mob grazing is looking like it is quite poor in that area then. We're always concentrating on the above ground biomass, and we're not thinking about what's going on in the roots then. And these actively growing deeper rooted plants will put more carbon into the soil as well then. So it's kind of, if you think about what people are talking about with cover crops now, we're allowing those plants to develop a lot of biomass but not mature before before we work them back into the soil again, and that's what's building up the fastest amount of carbon in the soil. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a new practitioner in the field here, I'm happy you brought up Jeff Brink, because Jeff just retired. For those of you who don't know, he was my advisor, and he just retired last week, and someone else brought up Jeff in the manure study today. So I'm going to tell him he was brought up twice today, right after he retired.
I think this is really important to be thinking in the terms that he's presenting here, and tying the cow together with the plant.
Great. We have time for questions, so if there are any questions,
Is there any concern, we're looking at charts here, we're looking at 12 to 16 inches. One of my concerns is usually if you watch the cow graze, she's going to take a double bite, which means you get less feed intake. The higher we push that height.
Right.
Whereas if we push it down to the 12, they can graze at a single bite. At the end of the day, the cow are only going to take so many bites a day.
Yeah, they can go up to, they can eat down
the
to
other thing
3.
is too, the higher you push there, it starts getting yellow from the bottom up.
You're right.
And then you lose the quality too on the bottom. So
You do.
is it really realistic to graze 16 inches on a cold AOT? Is the guy maybe better off going half and half or something like that? To keep the feed intake in.
Yeah, you're right. If you start parting those plants, we can still take, if you measure the height-wise, if you measure down, say you took 60% of that, we would probably be above that yellowing area then. We could leave that behind then. And in order to, and this is where, when you start grazing these little bit taller swards, getting the area right becomes really important as far as being able to harvest it efficiently without wasting too much from trampling then. And this is exactly that, 12 versus 14. I mean, if you find that 12 inches works well as far as getting it efficiently harvested in your system then that's perfect then. You've allowed those plants to recover and grow. The problem that when I talk about this to farmers is they've got to have control over the area they're giving their cows for that 12-hour period. You can't turn cows into a sward like this for 2 days and expect to harvest anything like even probably 40% of it. Then it'll all be wasted then. And because you're giving it a longer rest period, unless you've got lots of acres, it won't work then. But you're right, getting that kind of grass harvested efficiently, it becomes a balancing act then. And you start getting super tall, then multiple moves in a day, obviously you're going to be best yet then, but then you bump up against labor then.
Would it make sense to follow your dairy cows then with a dry cover?
I personally don't like that. I mean,
I'm just asking.
It sounds good, but grazing behavior-wise, if you actually watch what those animals are doing, they're coming back to the places where the cows took it shortest, usually then, rather than grazing the taller, ranker stuff. And so they end up sometimes doing more damage then. So on Amish farms, I have seen horses do they actually do what we would hope they would do then, but it seems like, maybe other people have different experiences, but dry cows and heifers seem to graze the same spots and leave the old stuff behind. So I'd rather get the area set up so that the cows are going to harvest what we want them to harvest in that time, rather than trying to catch up.
Maybe a higher stocking rate then.
A higher stocking rate, not mob grazing, but definitely for some people, again, way higher stocking rates than they're maybe used to seeing with dairy cows.
There's another question, please?
Have you done any individual samples, butterfat samples of cows on pasture? Do you have any experience with that? I'm wondering how low you see tests go on individual cows.
Or
anybody else in
herds drop. Individual cows can, but herds will drop quite low then. So.
Right. I'm familiar with that. I'm shocked at how low some individual cows are.
Yes.
that I have tested this year,
Mhm.
for the first time ever.
Yeah.
So how low is low?
I'm not even gonna say I'm trying to sell my cows.
They'll drop below 3%, I'm sure. of that, so.
2.9 is very obtainable.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. And
So,
so,
Brad, could we also do a spatial activity? You can, for example, all of the acidosis or something like that, cheese. And eventually cow can drop quite a bit, just due to the fact, whatever she's going through. She could have been in heat a few days ago.
Well,
The whole room would function.
Yeah,
That makes sense, I guess, it's kind of.
it does. I mean,
I mean, even in a conventional herd that's feeding a really acidotic ration, they're low fiber, feeding too much grain, they're not all gonna be low, there'll be variation within cows in that group too.
well, let's just say that, my cows were unbelievably low in test average. They're not, they're rather average-ish.
Yeah.
Let's just say they were incredibly low. Well, what other health problems might I be seeing? I mean, acidosis, like hoof type issues.
Yeah, and there's more going on. We have a protective effect from cows on pasture. If the cow's experiencing that level of acidosis were on concrete all the time, you'd see horrible foot problems, but being on grass buffers that effect then. But you'll see problems with body condition, and reproduction, just kind of more subtler things. But if you're using foot health as the gauge of acidosis, you're gonna miss it on many pasture cows.
And I'm not really seeing any other health issues at all.
I mean, there's genetic variation, obviously, and you can breed for it.
Let's let this question and then we'll have to grab.
Yeah,
some more
I should
if we
give
have
Mark
time.
some
Well,
time.
one more question, you guys.
But my question is, because we're talking about that, then, even the spring and when you start letting your cows out before you can even clip anything or do anything, that's usually when you get that, 3% or less butter fat, they go drop right down.
Yeah.
And, we tried through the years, I tried feeding enough forage, like, everybody said at the time, just give them a bale first crop and they'll pick the first crop. And they might do that for the first couple days, and then after that, if it isn't any quality, they ain't gonna eat it. There's no way you're gonna make a cow when she's got a choice between good grass. But there is, and my question is gonna be, how much of a palatable, higher fiber, let's just say, I think a really good choice for that is in but Western alfalfa, stemmy, pretty palatable. You'd be surprised how much Western hay a cow will eat when she's on pasture. How much, I looked at it as 10-15 pounds of dry hay, which is basically, dry matter basis is pretty close because Western hay is 10% moisture. How much do you think it takes to really make an effort? Because to me, it's got to be almost 50% of the intake of that cow in order to.
Absolutely. Early on it does, and you're right, it's a hard time to manage then. And you almost have to limit access to pasture if you want to make that work then, and start very early then, rather than wait.
Yeah.
So that's the exception to this rule of letting it get taller first. Start very early and really transition them with small amounts of pasture intake with large amounts of stored forage intakes early on to ease that transition. You may not get the sharp drop that you see then. And then as far as how much afterwards, this is where becoming a little bit obsessive about manure quality comes in then, because you may find that you're going to be changing it maybe day to day. You start to see some really loose manure out there, and you're going to add a couple pounds in the barn of stored forage then, and just kind of playing that game all the time then. So I don't.
I've got one more quick question though. Sodium bicarb, what's the?
Yes, do it. That will help, especially with the heat stress as well then. Having access to bicarb, it doesn't need to be force fed, but having constant access to bicarb will help reduce the level of milk fat depression in the summertime then. Sorry.
No. Do you mind if I make sure they get your email if they have more questions?
Yeah,
resource,
feel
so
free
I can
to
pass on to you?
I'd love to talk
No,
about
that's
it.
wonderful. Thank you very much.